Chapter 17. Castle Foyle. Deeper in the cavern, Gade discovered a storage chamber piled with spare boards and planks. He carried them up, planning to spend most of the night making repairs to the Elawn. Gabriella was already exhausted from the past few days. Since Gade's hammering made it impossible to sleep in the cabins, Gabriella curled up in Nicromedes' reading chair. She could not bring herself to sleep in his blankets. The blankets were so old and musty anyway. But the successful opening of his chest to retrieve the folio they had copied and replaced it left Gabriella feeling as though they had indeed won the friendship of their ancient host. As she nestled into the high curved sides of the chair, she could almost feel his protective presence. She pictured herself a baby bird resting in his cupped hands, the journey remaining less daunting. The next morning, the repairs to the Elawn were finished. The replacement boards fitted neatly into the hull. Gade and Omanuju explored the lagoon for any signs of the wyvern. When they were satisfied that it was gone, they returned to the ship and pushed off from the mooring post. Gabriella ducked into the cabin as the Elawn passed through the waterfall. For an hour or so, she studied the map from the folio and looked for useful clues. But she could decipher nothing. The symbols refused to yield up their meaning. Discouraged, Gabriella went topside and found Gade in high spirits. "You will come to tell your grandchildren about the banquet we will enjoy tonight," he said, leaning back in his chair, his feet resting on the Elawn's wheel. "Long have my people been friends with the House of Foyle. When the Cryan hunted us, the Foyles gave us refuge. To show our thanks, after the Skyland Empire had fallen, we presented one of the silver trees from the Blue Woods to them." Gabriella was not sure she followed everything the skipper was saying, but she nodded anyway. Gade was blue, so she surmised that a tree from the Blue Woods would be special to his kind. She spent the rest of the morning scrubbing her trousers and tunic with large soap and hung them up to dry on the bow. Meeting a king and queen was no small thing. She found some twine in the cabinets below and used it to braid her hair up. She could have done with some ribbons and pins, but the twine would do. She liked the effect. It made her look older and more mature, just the impression she hoped to make on royalty. The island came into view mid-afternoon. Gade, who had been humming wistful tunes for most of the day, grew silent. Omanuju joined him on deck, and his expression soon matched Gade's own. Gabriella could not understand their sobriety. Weren't the feast and a royal court awaiting them? She studied the island growing off the bow. The rock of the building merged seamlessly with the stone of the outcropping beneath. But as they neared, the castle with its village clustered next to its protective walls looked abandoned. The flags flying from the tower battlements were tattered or missing. No smoke rose from any chimney, nor did any lookout hail them from the battlements. No one on the deck from the Elawn spoke, until Gade leapt up and leaned over the wheel, pointing. "There, in that window there, I see someone." Gabriella and Omanuju squinted, shading their eyes, but neither could make out any figure or movement in the castle at all. "It looked like a young girl," Gade said. The fourth side of the castle opened to a lush green slope that ran down to the village. At one time, it must have been a well-manicured lawn, but now it was choked with tall weeds and small trees that had taken root. The Elawn flew over the docks. A few ships remained rocking slightly in the water, but most of the piers were empty. Gabriella thought this was a good sign. Raiders would have stolen all the ships, but there were other ill omens. As the Elawn came closer, they could see masts rising out of the water where ships had sunk in the harbor. Gade encircled the Elawn around the village again for a better look. This time, they could see stagnant water pooled on the decks of the ships still afloat, sitting low in the bay from the weight. Omanuju counted the masts of sunken ships that rose from the harbor. 14, he announced. These ships were not sunk deliberately. It was neglect. This place has been abandoned. Gabriella would have been willing to abandon the place too, if not for the possibility that someone had been left behind. The single girl that Gade insisted he had seen. Gade banked the ship towards the castle. They paused over the perimeter wall and the gatehouse. The curtain wall rose up huge before them, blank windows and more blank windows. Gade pulled the ship hard to port. Along the western wall of the castle, there was a spacious garden, its overgrown greenery spreading from the castle wall down to the cliff's edge. On the ledge stood stone mooring posts for what could only be a dock for airships. Weeds grew in the pathways of the unkempt garden, and its bird baths were filled with green slime. A pelican flapped into the air from his perch on the head of an ivory-covered statue and squawked his displeasure at being disturbed. Otherwise, all was quiet. Gade threw a line overboard and leapt after it, pushing through tall weeds. He pulled the Elawn against a post with an ominous thump. With the silent statues and overgrown plants, the garden had a feel of a cemetery. Gade even said as much, looking up at the castle walls and the empty, yawning darkness in the windows. "Never have I been to a place that feels so dead," he said, drawing his sword to slash his way through one of the weed-choked paths. Omanuju threw out the gangway and ran down it. Adamantus followed. Gabriella was rooted in place on the dock, frozen by indecision. Her instincts told her that the island was dangerous, and she was loath to leave the familiar safety of the Elawn. But in the end, as her friends disappeared into the garden, she rushed down the gangway after them, reluctant to remain alone in a place that already felt haunted. As the crew from the Elawn climbed up the slope, the grass was so high that it had collapsed on itself in pillowy mounds. Tree branches had grown unchecked and interlocked with one another as they fought for space. The air trap beneath was cold. Moisture from a previous day's rain darkened trunks and hung on bushes in fat drops. Vines were everywhere, winding over benches and strangling the castle walls. At the top of the slope, they reached a colonnade and paused through an archway that led into the castle courtyard, which was dominated by an enormous dead tree, its broken and twisted limbs stretching higher than the battlements. Gabriella was sure it had been a magnificent tree when it was alive, a trunk that was as thick as a half-dozen men. The lower branches were bigger than the trunks of lesser trees. From one of them dangled a broken swing on a frayed rope. The courtyard, like the garden, had an air of abandonment despite the signs of the previous residents. A wheelbarrow, empty water jugs, a donkey harness. A rat scurried along a wall past a crushed egg basket. As Gabriella gazed about the courtyard, Gade stared at the tree, his face contorted in pain. It dawned on her slowly what was going on. This was the blue oak, the gift of Gade's people, now dead and withered. She moved alongside him, then touched his shoulder. When her hand did not disappear into him as it had when she had swung a mace at him, she reached out and put her arms around him. Her gesture broke down his resistance. He collapsed to his knees and covered his face in his hands, golden tears slipping between his fingers. "It was one of the last," he wept. Gabriella squeezed his shoulders. She turned to Omanuju for some type of explanation. "The Blue Woods disappeared long ago," he said. "All that remains are trees like this one." Gabriella searched the skeletal branches for any sign of blue, but only saw brown and gray. She was beginning to feel Gade's sense of loss when, in the slanting rays of the setting sun, there was a brilliant flash of royal blue. She inclined her head for a better look, hoping her eyes did not deceive her. The wind rose, and the dry branches clicked as they rubbed together. Dead bark drifted to the ground. But between the shifting branches, she saw two glittering jewels twirling and dancing in the wind. "Gade," she said, "there are still 2, maybe 3 leaves." His face snapped upwards, his eyes bright and intent, even as the tears still wet his cheeks. At first, his expression was skeptical, a furrow running between his brows, but once he saw the leaves, he leapt the wall and scaled the tree faster than a squirrel. Branches cracked and fell beneath him, but his climbing was fluid and unbroken. He looked as comfortable in the tree as the rigging of the Elawn. The further destruction of dead branches was of little concern to him, as he snapped them out of his way, forcing Omanuju and Gabriella to dodge the falling debris. Gade defied gravity as he leaned on branches that appeared too insubstantial to support his weight. He plucked the sprig and cradled it against his breast as he swung down from the tree, landing without a sound. Gabriella fished her handkerchief from a pocket and handed it to Gade. He soaked it in a puddle of rainwater and wrapped the precious leaves. He spoke softly over them, an inaudible incantation. Blue leaves on white cloth. It looked as if he held a piece of the sky in his palms. "They are beautiful," Gabriella whispered. "Hope always is." He folded the handkerchief and placed his treasure in his breast pocket. They followed Adamantus as the elk, sniffing the air, moved towards the gate that led into the main keep. Gabriella felt a new courage in her heart. Gade's rescue of the leaves felt like a small victory against the desolation that surrounded them. Perhaps they would find survivors and help free them from the island. If they wanted to be found, she thought. A grand hall waited beneath the keep. Windows stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Scones with etched glass lined the walls, and even the rafters were incised with elaborate carvings. Fluted columns spread their intricate capitals wide to hold up the ceiling, which framed the sky with wide skylights. Stone statues were crowded around a long bouquet table, poised in the everyday task one would expect at a lavish dinner party. The long rotted remnants of food were scattered about the moldy plates and bowls where rats had fed, leaving bones strewn across the table and on the stone floor at the feet of the diners. The wine had evaporated from the crystal goblets long ago, leaving behind brownish-red watermarks. The figures around the table were hauntingly real, so much so that Gabriella waited for them to abruptly break out of their poses and offer greetings. They were frozen perfectly, too perfectly in gestures of laughing, speaking, touching, eating. The clothes on their backs, the forks in their hands, the jewelry that adorned them were all carved with detail that was beyond anything she had seen before. Even the skin, eyes, lips, hair looked as if they belonged to real people, just caught in stone. Omanuju finally voiced what Gabriella was struggling to understand. These are the people of the castle. They have been enchanted. He touched his hand to a servant who had been frozen in the act of placing a tray on the table. Whatever had been on the tray had long ago disintegrated into dust. Somehow, they have been turned to stone and frozen in time. Gabriella could not bring herself to touch anything. One laughing woman reminded Gabriella of her neighbor, Mrs. Zelasi, who shared apple sticks with Gabriella and Damien every fall. She turned away from the entire scene and crossed her arms to fend off a shiver. "What sorcery is this?" Gede asked. He stopped at the head of the table beside a handsome middle-aged man. A velvet jacket, a fur collar, and a satin tunic, now slightly tattered, hung from his motionless body. The signet ring on his finger was crusted over with salt from the sea air. Beside him was a woman with elaborate hair and a muslin dress. The cloak rested on her shoulders. Gabriella guessed that she was the queen. Like the king and all the others, her body was untouched by the passage of time, only turned to granite. "This is King Robert." Gede studied the man's face. "It has been generations since I have set foot here, but I know the Foyle faces. Some features do not change. The eyes, the mouth, the nose. He looks just the way the grandson or great-grandson of Lawrence Foyle would." Gede turned a remorseful face to Omanuju. "In Lawrence's time, they had enemies capable of doing something like this. But today, such powers have long been lost, or so I thought." "As did I. It is quite disturbing." Omanuju passed close to a man paralyzed in the act of adjusting his monocle. "But these powers are rarely ever lost completely. In dark catacombs, and nocturnal ceremonies, and blood rituals, they are rediscovered and sustained by humans with foul hearts. What we thought was dead was only dormant. What we must try to determine now is just how long ago this took place." "My guess from the decay of the items on the table, 3 years," Gede offered. "They all seem to have been caught unawares." "No," Gabriella interrupted. "Not everyone. Some tried to flee." She pointed to a doorway where 3 servants stood. One was caught, lifting a flagon of wine as if to deflect some oncoming blow. The other 2 had been frozen in the act of running away. Omanuju stepped into the corridor behind the figures. It was dark and unlit, but Gabriella could see the shape of other frozen victims cowering in the darkness. If she had not known better, she would have guessed these were people simply hiding in fear. She remained in the banquet hall, where the sunlight was beginning to disappear. With growing worry, she noticed shadows lengthening within the walls. "This one is pleading for mercy," Gede said from the corridor. Only Gede's eyes, like gold coins, were visible in the dark. "And he is looking down, as if his attacker was small." Then the creature who attacked had the gift of speech. Otherwise, why try to reason with it? Omanuju asked. "So many servants. This must have been a royal banquet of some kind," Gede said. "It was a birthday celebration," Gabriella said. Omanuju and Gede came back into the banquet hall. "Look at those boxes." In the corner, faded and collapsed boxes sat tumbled together in a pile. Balls of wrapping paper open like rotten flowers. "The king or queen's birthday?" Gede ventured. You would not give the king a dress, though, Gabriella said, lifting a box lid with her toe and revealing a pristine white dress inside. And if the two of you could not tell, this is not a grown-up's dress. It is a girl's, about my age, maybe younger. I think, if we want more answers, we ought. Omanuju's voice dropped to a whisper. We are not alone. I heard footsteps. At the same time, Adamantus swung his head up and began to gallop down another dank, closed corridor, a passageway for servants to move about unseen and unheard. They followed the elk, running past doorways with dark pools of shadow. At the end of the dim passage, they pushed aside a moldering tapestry to enter a room with a soaring ceiling and glorious windows. Their light converged on a dais in the center of the room, with 2 thrones carved from bloodwood inlaid with pearls and polished shells. The room was thick with warm, stuffy air, but it was not still nor silent. A girl darted up the steps to the thrones and threw herself onto the right-hand one, the king's place. Her chest lifted and fell as she struggled to catch her breath. Her dress, once elegant, had a tightly woven lace skirt and a satin bodice. At one time it had been white, but now it was brown and gray with dirt, ragged with frayed hems and gaping holes. It was many sizes too small, a better fit for a young girl about 10 years of age. On this girl, who had the rounded hips and elongated limbs of early adolescence, it bordered on indecent. She had thrown herself down so that she had half sat, half lay across the king's throne. For a moment, she tried to make her face into a mask of royal inscrutability, but as they stepped closer, she cried out in the oceanic tongue, "Stop where you are!" Her voice cracked and echoed in the high chamber. They halted before the mysterious creature, studying her. At a moment she demanded, "Who are you that trespass in my castle and approach me bearing arms?" Omanuju looked to Gede, who put his sword away. "We are friends," Omanuju said, looking at her intently. "I am Omanuju, Aunt of Harkness. This is Gabriella Carlyle, and this is Gede, who comes from a race of people long allied to the House of Foyle. We are journeying east and stopped here to visit friends. We are saddened to find the castle in such a state." The girl sat silent. With one hand, she twirled her knotted hair. With the other, she touched a small scepter resting on the arm of the throne. Omanuju paused. Even Gabriella knew that the rules of etiquette required that the girl make a response. Clearly, this girl was ignorant. "May I ask whom I address?" Omanuju finally asked. "You might," said the girl, who was then silent. The lull did not last long, for she began to giggle and laugh, a deep-throated mocking laugh. Gabriella curled her hands into fists. She knew a bully when she saw one, and Gabriella understood this girl, even if her companions did not. Too many children like her had picked on her and Damien. Yet Omanuju and Gede waited in respectful silence. If Gabriella had had her choice, she would have turned and walked away, leaving the girl on the island alone. After a long, indulgent laugh, the girl said, "You may ask, but I don't have to tell." She giggled again at her response, hugging her sides in an ostentatious show of agony. There was something else about her that Gabriella did not like. When the girl spoke, she sounded as if she was making every attempt to sound younger than her age. She lisped, like a pouting child. Gabriella wanted to leave. She had a foreboding sense that nothing good would come of staying and parleying with this girl. Reasoning with her might be impossible. She was crazy mad. Gabriella wondered if Omanuju and Gede had the same reaction as she did. She moved shoulder to shoulder with Omanuju and would have tugged on his arm to encourage him to leave if Gede had not taken a large step forward. His approach put an immediate end to the girl's laughter. Her expression became fierce, and she snatched up the object on the armrest. It was a rod the size and length of a drummer's stick. It was tapered and made of a light blue substance, either wood or light stone. Gede's eyes fixed on it as if it were a dagger pointed at his throat. "Stop it!" The girl screamed and stamped. She pointed the stick directly at Gede. It was no stick, Gabriella realized, but a wand. "Where did you get that?" Gede asked. "I don't have to tell you anything," she said, some of her haughtiness returning. "I am Princess Sybil Foyle, and this castle is mine." Gede remained rooted in place and held his hands out at his side. "What happened to your people, Princess Sybil? What happened to your parents?" "Nothing they did not deserve." the princess said coldly. Gabriella wanted desperately to leave, but Omanuju spoke up. Princess Sybil, they were all dressed for a festival. Not a festival, you stupid man. A birthday. My birthday. I told them I did not want a birthday. I told them I did not want to grow up and do stupid grown-up things. They didn't listen. They said everyone grows up. I ignored them, but they forced me into a dress and Father made me come downstairs to the hall. He tried to make me sit beside him and greet all the stupid people. I tossed all their gifts aside. Father became angry. I told him I wished he and Mother were dead. I ran away and went to cry on the battlements. That was when one of the guests found me. I hadn't noticed him downstairs, but there had been too many people for me to notice anyway. He gave me the only good gift of the whole day. He gave me this. Sybil held the wand straight up, then lowered it toward them again. He was a nice man. He told me that I did not have to grow up. He gave me my gift and told me it was made from the tree outside in the courtyard. Gede mumbled something biting under his tongue. Do you remember anything particular about this man? Asked Omanuju. Sybil was quiet for a moment before answering. He spoke with a strong accent. He was hard to understand, but he was the nicest person at that stupid party. Did he have a name? I don't have to tell you. Gabriella guessed that Sybil didn't know. Omanuju tried a different line of questions. Did the man have any rune markings on his hands, bracelets, or other jewelry, perhaps something around his neck? Yes, something around his neck, a ring. It was strange because it was broken. Omanuju dropped his head so that his chin touched his chest. The Sevor's reach has grown wide, he whispered. Gede picked up where Omanuju had left off. The Sevor are evil men, Princess Sybil. The trees of the Blue Forest were never meant to be fashioned into such weapons. A weapon that should never be given to someone without training. Please release your people from this curse. So they can order me around and tell me to grow up? She swung the wand in Gede's direction like a sword. You are just like them, aren't you? Except that you are blue. Princess Sybil, Omanuju said. Stop there. Stop there or I will kill you, see? It happened quickly. Sybil aimed the wand at Gede, and white light blasted out of its end. Gede leapt out of the way, but it was too late. An aurora engulfed him. For a moment, Gabriella had to shield her eyes. It was as bright as looking into the sun. Then she watched, horrified, as the light took form and rooted around Gede like a whirlpool. A bright light from within him bled outwards and commingled with the whirl of white. The colors spun and even appeared to fight for a few moments. Gede was trapped by them. The swirl rose from the floor. Gabriella saw that Gede's feet were missing. Gede! She cried. The light moved higher. Now his legs were gone. The spinning was increasing in velocity like water down a drain. Gabriella could still see Gede's face, the corners of his mouth bent in resignation and sorrow. His brow furrowed as if he wished to comfort Gabriella. Don't worry about. The light burst outward. A wind swept through the room, shaking dust off the rafters and flapping the faded tapestries. Gabriella stumbled backwards. Gede was gone. No! Gabriella threw herself forward. On the floor where Gede had last stood, the white handkerchief remained, the sprig still inside. Gabriella picked it up and held it to her chest. Tears filled her eyes. She turned to Sybil. The princess was examining the wand with surprise. Apparently, not even she had expected such a display. You miserable brat! Gabriella spat. It was not only Sybil she saw, but every Harkonite child that had ever been cruel to her or her brother. Before she could say anything more, Omanuju stepped in front of her. Sybil aimed the wand again. Now, even Adamantus moved close as if to protect them. You want to be next? Gabriella, Omanuju whispered, think of your family. They will not be served by your death here. Gabriella could not reply. Her voice was choked. Her face was wet with tears of anger. Before she could speak again, she noticed a short man watching them from an adjoining hallway. He was wearing a motley-colored jester costume. The wide vertical stripes were faded. The elbows and knees had been patched. More strangely, he had 2 hand mirrors hanging by leather belts around his neck, one on his chest, the other on his back. The way they swayed assured Gabriella that the gesture was not frozen like the other residents of the castle. When Sybil noticed him, he dropped down to one knee and groveled. "Oh, most radiant Sybil," he said in a hoarse voice. "Please forgive me for leaving my station of the kitchen, but I heard shouts and thought you might be in danger." Although Gabriella could hear the sarcasm in his voice, Sybil remained clueless. "Meshach, take this girl with you. She will be my new slave. As for this man, I will have him entertain me with stories until supper time." "As you wish," Meshach said, rising. Omanuju nudged Gabriella to go. It was useless to resist, she knew. If Omanuju entertained Sybil for a while, perhaps Gabriella could engineer a way to escape. She was not confident that this man would help her, though. He looked at her with suspicious eyes and smelled foul, like rotten eggs and stale urine. "Go prepare dinner, slaves," Sybil said. "You, Manju, or whatever your name is, you sit there and entertain me." Gabriella followed Meshach, but kept looking back over her shoulder at Omanuju. His eyes held no answers. Finally, the gesture took Gabriella by the shoulder and guided her into a corridor. Once out of earshot of Sybil, he mumbled, "Welcome to the prison rock of Foyle Island."